Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Daily Volatility Box report for September 30th, 2019. We are TOSindicators.com, home of the Volatility Box. Today was a quiet close to the end of the month. We had one trade in crude oil that set up. That one trade was a winner, but it gave us only our first target, and the second target still in the works. So we ended up just taking off both of our contracts at that first target into the close for a positive 600. The rest of the day was fairly muted. And so in tonight's video, we'll cover this crude oil trade in which we were able to pull out 600 to close out the month. And we'll also talk about just looking at the gold charts with the idea of what happens when price breaks the conservative volatility box early in the morning and maybe some signs that you might glean from it. So let's dive into charts and take a look at the action today in crude first. So here we have a chart of the crude oil futures with the aggressive volatility box plotted. We'll start by drawing our timeline and check to see whether or not we breached either side's aggressive volatility box entry lines in the first hour. We see here that we very clearly didn't, and that was our sign to continue to use the aggressive volatility box for the rest of the day, at least until told otherwise. Our entry came towards the end of the day when we had price fall perfectly into our volatility box entry lines. Our stop was outside of the volatility box where we gave it 30 cents of room, and our first target was the 30 cents, which was hit right into the close. It went up to about 36, 38 cents. So you did have plenty of opportunity to get out. For us, this was something where we just took both of our contracts off instead of having afternoon risk. But if we fast forward to see what's currently happening, we're making our way towards what would have been our second target, which is right up here. And so they happen to overlap the second target line from our entry along with the second target line where it's currently plotted. And I think we'll get that slam up just in case you happen to have any risk where you held the trade into the afternoon hours. But for us, we just took the plus 600 and moved on. All right, one more trade that I'd like to talk about in today's video, or at least just an observation. We've talked about this in several videos. And just a reminder, the only trade we're looking at in gold is 6 to 7. But let's take a look at the charts today because it just gives us an interesting example for what I'd like to talk about. So this is today's chart right here. And so we didn't have any of our trade opportunities in that 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. hour that we like to look at. So again, just keep that in mind. This is just commentary. But now we've talked about what happens when we see that even on the conservative volatility box, price looks like this. So if we switch on over, we were still not able to stay contained, not even close to contained inside of the volatility box. And this was then our sign to essentially look at gold being a trending market for the rest of the day. And Paul, you're the one who actually brought this to our attention. So if you're watching this video, this is just highlighting some of the commentary we talked about. But let's see what the day ended up happening, right? And so when Paul and I looked at this chart, we were trying to see, okay, so this had just broken the conservative volatility box. We had the slight pullback here, and we've noticed this to be a recurring pattern where in our quote-unquote pullback, we pull back to our first level, or our most aggressive pullback, let's say, is where our entry line would have been from that previous hour. And what we've also seen happen a couple times is once we break past that conservative box, we'll pull back to the aggressive volatility box entry lines to go short. And so just remember, when we break this gives us our bias, first of all, that tells us that we're trending in the short direction. And we're no longer looking at fades trying to go long gold, but instead just looking at shorts in that same direction. And now if we were to switch back from the conservative to the aggressive volatility box, but looking only for shorts, this has been a pattern where price has slammed into our aggressive volatility box entry line for the short. Even though we broke through our conservative box, this is the pattern that then lets you aggressively participate in the short direction. And we didn't get as much of a follow through as I thought we would. But the options here, I believe we're going for something like 75, 78 cents. And so we did end up getting a flush of about 25-ish or so percent gain on our at the money options with our closest expiration before the aggressive volatility box then ended up being our point of reversal. And so in this case, again, we've talked about how we take off targets and scale out. And so your first third or first half or first batch of your contracts, whatever increment that you've bought in, would be taken off when price hits our volatility box, right? And that to us, it represents price exhaustion. And so this is just one opportunity, just another observation point where, once again, we break through our conservative volatility box, which gives us our bias. Using that bias, we look to trade only in that direction. and you could then either be looking to fade off of the edges of the conservative or the aggressive volatility box. But we've noticed that the aggressive volatility box gives you more entries, although there have been times that we have continued to go up a little bit more to the conservative volatility box to fade. But really, that's where you can scale into positions. And we, again, for these sorts of trades, prefer options where you have defined risk. Right? And so this is where you had your opportunity to get short, participate in this move. Unfortunately, you didn't get much more follow through, and then the rest of your contracts for us would have been a stop out at break even. And so, Paul, we had talked about just observing how gold turns out into the end of the day, and that's just some commentary for you to at least help with regards to how we can read these brackets starting to close and still gather some information from it and trade, even though we might not necessarily have a volatility box fade set up. All right, so once again, to close out the month, we had only one trade in the crude oil futures. This was a winner, and that gave us a positive 600 over two contracts. The markets were fairly muted across the board otherwise, and so that was the end of our month of September. All right, take care, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your night, and we look forward to trading with you tomorrow. Thanks.